Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Prime Minister of St. Martin, distinguished delegates all. The chairman forgot to tell you that on that Saturday morning, they gave me a cup, and the cup had inscribed on it simply, "This generation shall change the world." I understood then, on that Saturday morning, that this was a journey. It was not a single event or a single destination. And if I ever doubted it, knowing where we stand today as a country and knowing where the world stands, confronting some of the challenges that more than ever will come to determine what aspects of our civilization survive, I know it is a journey. But it is a journey for us in the region that too often leaves us invisible. And in our view, sometimes we feel that others believe that we are dispensable. It is a journey that causes us to ask the question, how many people will keep us front of mind after a video as you have just seen? Or does it evoke the emotions of the moment, then to surrender once again to the politics of the day and to the bureaucracy of the day? We in the Caribbean have had to face difficulties and risk for our almost entire postmodern settlement of these islands. Some may argue that those who are the original inhabitants of this region equally faced similar challenges and were themselves decimated from their places of abode. This is not an easy thing for a people or for a nation state to confront. I've given too many speeches. We've said the same thing over and over and over. And we understand that to move from risk to resilience requires the acceptance of responsibility on the part of many. First and foremost, for us who inhabit these lands. For us who must change our practices and our laws to reflect a greater level of resilience from that which we inherited and accepted as par for the course and acceptable for the times in which we lived. Those people in Barbados, for example, who in the post-Hurricane Janet environment believed that it was acceptable to receive the work and the direction of what came to be known as storm carpenters because of a shortage of carpenters who were capable of being available to restore the housing that was so devastated after Hurricane Janet. We came to accept that it was okay for them to build what we have termed flat roof houses, removing from our landscape centuries of architecture that understood that to resist the winds from which we are vulnerable, that we required gable roofs and hip roofs in order to withstand it with minimal overhang, just as you see here on this ancient building in the Barbados Museum and Historical Society, the hip roof. But what was to have been a temporary fix came from government buildings to chattel houses, as you look around you, came to be regarded as a permanent feature of our modern landscape. The ability to acknowledge and to correct these practices is part and parcel of the changes in our behavior that are required of us if we are literally to prepare ourselves for a new world in which our vulnerability has considerably risen from that which it was for the last few decades. It requires that we have a different relationship with that most vital of commodities called water. And in fact, I have asked the Minister of Water, who is here with us, to bring to Cabinet only this week a plan to prepare the country for the level of conservation that is critically needed as we now find ourselves clearly in the midst of a drought in this year of our Lord. These are the things that require changes in behavior, but some of them have a cost. And to the extent that they have a cost, the society and the government has to determine how best it can work together to finance those things that are essential to our existence and not optional to our lives. And what do I mean? In almost every single Caribbean country, the basic and critical water infrastructure was laid more than a century ago, invariably by countries that were responsible for our colonization and whose resources depended not simply on the taxation of a limited sized population on each individual country. We find ourselves today confronted with the absolute reality of having to replace infrastructure at a cost that is highly prohibitive and over the course of the next 2 to 3 decades, and have to be able to do so in a way that can sustain the viability first of our states, because without water we have nothing. We have been told, for example, in our own country, that with the 2,500 kilometers of pipe that we have, the majority of which has to be replaced, at a price that we are fighting, coming close to $1 million per kilometer, that it would be a mammoth task of virtually 25% of our GDP to simply seek to replace the water infrastructure without reference to what we must invest in augmentation of water resources as we confront the reality of being a water-scarce country in this world. This has nothing at all to do with our ability to meander through and to navigate through our otherwise difficult and perilous economic circumstances. I raise this issue because it requires of us, and Barbados is just but an example of what is necessary in the rest of the region. And perhaps the conversation is best regional and not domestic. It requires of us a conversation with our people to begin to understand how best, one, we may conserve the precious resource, given that we are more likely to face the droughts, and you have heard from all of the previous speakers before me, all of the evidentiary basis for why I speak in the tone in which I speak. But we must first confront how we are going to deal with it. It is easy for us to say, let's run some public service announcements. But public service announcements in and of themselves will not be sufficient. And the change in behavior has, in my view, first to be led by the children of this nation and by their parents and by the communities, recognizing that the cost of water will continue to rise if the level of water that is wasted in terms of non-revenue water continues to be on the increase, as we have seen in the last few decades. I go further. We have to make a determination as to how best we put aside that money that is necessary to be able to stabilize our capital infrastructure program by first securing of our own a sinking fund that is dedicated purely to capital replacement over the course of the next few decades. It is going to be impossible for the people of this nation to replace 2,500 kilometers of infrastructure, water pipe, water mains, within a 10-year period or even a 20-year period. And we have, therefore, to look at a 25 to 30-year horizon that we simply put aside that which is necessary in order to be able to, I smell fire, smoke. Somebody check, please. It is critical that we put aside those funds. But the lumpy nature of the investment is such that we have, in my view, to make serious decisions as a nation, first and foremost, to protect the fund by embedding it in our Constitution. And I say so from the perspective that 30 years ago, a similar capital fund was simply disbanded without reference to the needs of the future. But secondly, we may have within the limited capacity of what you can earn within a small economy such as this, to protect and to preserve areas that will guarantee a level of revenue in order to be able to ensure that we can replace the critical infrastructure when needed. And to what do I refer? Everybody is interested in renewable energy. But renewable energy represents more than anything else the patrimony of the particular region. And if we therefore are to ensure and guarantee our own survival, it is my humble view that we may need to, particularly where we have public water infrastructure firms, to preserve a portion of the market for our water authorities to work in order to be able to help fund that sinking fund that is dedicated to capital infrastructure, so that there is no but or ifs as to how we can meet the targets with respect to the replacement of the mains as we go forward. And why do I say so? Having dealt with getting our own situation right, having dealt with looking in the mirror and determining what we must do and how we must change, whether in terms of our individual practices or collective practices or legislative framework, as we've tried to do in the past, and I believe that the head of SEDIMA knows it firsthand, because you could only call on the Jamaica Defense Force to come into Dominica to supplement the Dominican and RSS forces because of that treaty that we negotiated and passed in 2006 in Barbados, that many did not use until such time. But it is critical that we now engage those who have placed us on the front line of this battle. Ambassador Matherin made it clear that the percentage of contribution of this region to global greenhouse gases is as negligible as our capacity to distort global trade in goods and services. I use that deliberately as the reference point because for more than 25 years, this little region has tried to advance a simple argument for special and differential treatment with respect to our international trade obligations that has been largely unsuccessful because we have been invisible and disposable for most persons. Is there a difficulty? Is there a difficulty? Next door. Okay, thanks. If there is, I'm sure that I will guarantee that you get out before me. But the bottom line is that for more than 25 years, we have literally tried to sustain an argument against a one-size-fits-all prescription, and that recognizes that the inability to distort global trade in goods and services ought to matter, because there is a disproportionate consequence to enterprises within our region who, in many instances, were forced either to shut down production or to become marginalized because of the removal of non-tariff barriers and the reduction of tariffs as a result of our becoming signatory to the WTO and participating in a global trading bloc that was intended to bring sustainable development and progress to people. If we were unsuccessful then, for those decades, it causes me to wonder how successful we shall be now with respect to the acknowledgement by the rest of the world that these countries remain on the front line of a war that we did not start, nor do we sustain. And that if those images and voices that you just heard are to mean something, then it has to go beyond simply the tear or the acknowledgement of its power, and to recognize that when you return to your individual capitals or to your individual organizations, the continued belief that countries can be graduated on the basis of middle income status purely on GDP and precluded from access to critical funding to be able to modernize their infrastructure. In the face of inherent vulnerability, has really to become a historic topic rather than a fight that we are continuing to wage on a daily basis. I'm not even going in at this stage to the extent to which politics has been allowed, global politics and power relations has been allowed to literally creep in to the determination as to who can benefit and who shall not benefit. And I fully accept that the efforts are not simply at the level, or let me put it another way, that the battle is being waged not at the level of the technocrats or the management of international organizations, but is being waged, regrettably, at the level of capitals. This is unsustainable. And we have to determine that if we really want to be able to make progress against the battles that cause tremendous risk, such that we can become resilient, then we need to start doing things differently, and we need to start recognizing, first and foremost, that failure to act is largely because you do not believe that the problem is important enough to guarantee such action or to require such action. That's the hardest thing for us as Caribbean people to accept. And it's hard because the world is committed to acting beyond the 3-degree change. It fights on a 2-degree change. And it doesn't acknowledge that we need 1.5 to survive. Now you ask yourself, on what basis can there be a sustainable platform for international cooperation and development if the very right to life and the very right to the sustainable nature to sustaining our societies is not accepted as a prerequisite for action? I hope that your gathering here in this, our country, will help continue the process of being able to change minds and hearts, and not to build the action, because the foundation for action isn't with us. We understand what it is to have climate refugees. You saw Yvonne. She lives in Barbados, not Montserrat. You saw the people who had to leave Barbuda, or the people who have not returned to Dominica. The notion of climate refugees is well known to us here in the region. But then again, we're not buttressed by the comfort that migration is a major topic of importance for the world. Because when it comes to people, it becomes a no-no. But when it comes to the movement of capital and investment, it becomes highly accepted and desired by the majority of countries in the world. There is need for a moral and ethical discussion across the global landscape. And it is our contention that it is only when moral and ethical leadership is given, both at the national level and at the international level, that we will summon the courage to fight down these battles. Until such time, it is a form of idle entertainment for those who choose to watch. And I say so, not intending to shock, nor not intending to be rude, but I say so conscious that with every hurricane, the place of choice for those who don't go to shelters is a bathroom. I say so, conscious that for every meeting I make in September or October, I know that there is a risk or a likelihood of cancellation because we do not know what could befall us within 72 hours. I say so conscious that irrespective of whatever else you have to say about Haiti, it has not received 20% of the pledges pledged to it in the earthquake, in post-earthquake environment. I say so conscious that it is too easy to forget these images and too hard to stand up for what is right. I pray that those of you who gather here first will help us as policymakers understand the art of the possible. For you as technicians, more than anything else, will frame what is technically possible, whether at the level of infrastructure, science and technology, capacity to finance, or general policy making. But I also am conscious that the simple exercise of you determining what is possible will mean nothing unless buttressed by two levels of political will: domestic political will and international political will, without which we will just become a footnote in the history of mankind. Thank you, and God bless.